doesn't work in modern society.
Well, joining us to discuss this is Helen Croydon, who agrees with Chris, and Anne Atkins, who is a firm believer of marriage. So welcome, ladies.
Welcome.
Thank you for joining us. You agree?
I do, yes. And I think this idea of marriage per se, you know, that you share a house together, you sleep in the same bed, and you have all your meal times together, etc. It's lovely if you're the sort of person that does crave that 24/7 companionship, but I don't think it's really suitable for modern life, because if you think the way that we are today, before people get married, now we've usually had a lot more partners. We've usually lived on our own. Most of us have either been away to university or we've lived with flatmates, etc. So we're used to such a more independent lives and being in control of, you know, our own preferences and our own lifestyles. So I think this sudden jump to come
So we've just become selfish, then?
We haven't become selfish. I think we've become more independent, and this is modern life.
Well,
so
you got a bit further. You said that marriage is sexist, actually.
Well, I haven't said marriage is sexist, but related. But you know, I agree with Chris Evans's comments when he says that it does women down a little bit.
It's about ownership.
He said it's about ownership, and when marriage was founded several thousand years ago, it was because women couldn't take out a loan themselves, they couldn't take out a mortgage, they pretty much had to have a husband, even to be socially accepted. So I think, you know, years gone by, you pretty much had to have marriage to survive. But today we don't, but yet we still base this idea that, you know, you've got to get married, you've got to have children, you've got to live together, on this sort of outdated belief.
And you don't agree, do you?
I think this comment says a lot more about Chris Evans than it says about marriage. It is actually factually inaccurate, because he said we've been getting married for 3,000 years. Well, we've been getting married for a lot longer than that, probably more like 10,000, but it's hard to tell, but certainly at least 5,000 years. Whenever society has, humankind has been in groups, there has been a societal recognition of the most important bond, the most important relationship.
Wasn't that about ownership, though?
No, it was actually... That's another thing where he's completely wrong. In most primitive societies, marriage has been far more about the protection of women and children. It's about the protection of the vulnerable, rather than about men, because, you know, this is very sort of basic stuff, but it's in men's genetic interest to inseminate as many women as possible. It's in women's and children's interest to have that stability. So he is factually wrong on a number of things.
To be fair to Chris Evans, though, I mean, he's very happily married, and the reason why he was bringing this up was because he actually, in a roundabout way, believes in marriage so much he wants to make it work.
Right.
So he's trying to look at ways of doing that.
What is interesting, I mean, he may well have a point. I totally agree with Helen that there should be lots of options and that singleness is fantastic, and one of the interesting things about Christianity is that it forged the way for singleness. I mean, St Paul, it was really radical in saying being single is a good thing, and it is. It's a great thing if that's what you want to do. It's having that freedom was very, very important, particularly, again, for women. You know, that was very unheard of in the first century. But what Chris Evans the elephant in the room he seems to be missing is that the institution of marriage has taken all sorts of different forms in all sorts of different societies. There's often polygamy in societies, particularly when men get wiped out through war. We now have same-sex marriage. You know, there's the idea that marriage has got to be this kind of 1950s thing where women stay at home and, you know, is not...
do have that
Well, they may,
assumption,
but that's not the fault of marriage. It's not. It's the fault of our limited views. And of course, all the evidence, I mean, overwhelming evidence is in favour of marriage as a benign influence on the people engaged in it. It benefits women, it benefits men hugely. They live longer, they earn more, they have better health. But actually, just before we get onto that, the people it really, really, really benefits overwhelmingly is children. And all the evidence, hundreds and hundreds of research, you know, papers, studies have shown that the benefits to children are so wide-ranging.
I'll say a few things to that.
Education and
a lot of
health
those studies that do support that, you know, a two-parent family is beneficial to children also show that actually children from a loving parent are beneficial. So it's not so much the parents being together, it's the fact whether you have a stable and loving parent. As many studies support that.
You're not quite
and
right
also,
on
it's
that.
not.
It's the two stable parents staying together that is so beneficial.
It's not so much the two parents, it's actually the love from the parent that is more significant.
Well,
but the other thing I'd say with children is
anyway,
that, you know, not everyone has children, and also not everyone is at a point in their life where they're seeking a romantic relationship and they're ready for children. There's plenty, you know, this idea that, you know, you've got to get married also applies to people when they're very young, and it also applies to people in their 50s after they've already had their children. I still think there's this pressure that, you know, you've got to be together and stay together.
You say monogamy has never worked.
I don't think that monogamy doesn't work. I think this idea of lifelong monogamy is not necessarily realistic. I think that...
You say, look across every culture, always been a different type of cheating. Courtesans,
yes.
concubines, geisha girls. Traditional model of monogamy
this
isn't
idea
real.
of romantic love, where we are in this slightly infatuated state, it's very unique to humans. And yes, of course, we fall in love. And of course, when we are in that stage, we want to be with someone. When I'm really into someone, I only want to be with that person. I don't want to be with anyone else. But anthropological studies have proven that this state of romantic love is the same as being slightly addicted to a drug. And I'm sorry, it doesn't last.
Hang on, saying
Can I just come back on that point, Helen, that saying that there's always been cheating? Of course there's always been cheating. There's always been theft. That doesn't mean that owning anything is wrong. You know, it means that we don't manage to live up to what we want.
If you really want this, you know, stable relationship where you live with someone, you want to build a home and you really like that lifestyle, that's fine. Then, yeah, of course, you have to work at it and suddenly want that. But I agree with that. But it doesn't suit everyone. And certainly I've never wanted that lifestyle.
And I respect that.
So therefore,
and I'm sure
we need to be a bit more relaxed.
I'm sure you and I agree on an awful lot of stuff. As I say,
can I just say, do you think that, because
single.
you said that's not what I want, is it a possibility that it's just not what you found? I mean, if you were in that state in a relationship where, and that just continued and continued until 20 years have gone past, 30 years have gone past, and you still found yourself in that state,
See,
then
I think that assumption is sort of what I've faced the whole time. Isn't it you've just not met the right person? I'm not averse to falling in love. I'd love to fall in love. It's about this idea that what we have, I think our model of the ideal relationship and marriage is that you share everything. You make joint decisions on finances.
You see, that again is making the Chris Evans mistake, that marriage is wrong because marriage has got to be like that. Of course it hasn't got to be like that. There have been all sorts of marriages where you know, the Churchills didn't share a same bed. They each had their own bedroom. My mother said to me, she thought it was very important and my parents were married for almost 70 years. Sadly, my mother died just before their 70th wedding anniversary. But one of the things she said to me was, you must have your own bank account. Now, actually, my husband and I haven't we have a joint bank account and we're very happy with it. But for her, it was really important that both she and my father had their own money. You know, we shouldn't be tied by tiny little, narrow-minded cultural interpretations of marriage.
Absolutely.
That doesn't mean that marriage itself is not a wonderful thing.
Also, when you look at the path of life, you find your partner, the first flush of, you know, very exciting. You get married, and then you spend maybe a long time together and looking at some of the comments that we've made, and then it's a companionship. but
no, not necessarily, Helen. That's not fair.
Well, I think we're quite suited to long-term relationships, but not necessarily lifelong relationships.
Better when you're much older, when you've got someone to look after you, but each other when you're looking after one another.
That's making the assumption that they are going to look after you. Might end up looking after them. It's a big gamble.
I think marriage works at all stages. We've been married quite a long time now, and I've found it's wonderful when you first meet each other. It's wonderful when you're having children together. It's wonderful when your children are growing up. No, I don't agree with that at all. It is also fantastic when, like my parents, you're in your 90s and you're still with the person you fell in love with when you're 21. And you're still in love, as my parents were.
With that?
OK.
Great.
Nobody is saying marriage is easy, and I am certainly not saying marriage is for everyone, and I'm certainly not saying we should interpret marriage in the way that our society does.
Let's have a little listen to what people at home are saying.
Leanne says marriage is about commitment, not ownership. No wonder Chris Evans' marriages have failed, although you said he's very happy.
He's trying to make it right.
Yeah. Rebecca says, I think marriage is about a man and a woman who love each other so much that they want to be committed to each other forever. Sally said marriage hasn't always been about ownership for a very long time. My mum refused to say honour and obey in her vows in 1978. My parents are still happily married. Although Kelly, who opposes that view, says on my second marriage, my ex-husband, thought he could own me. Boy, was he wrong. Chloe says marriage is an outdated concept. I can think of far better ways to celebrate love and spend the thousands needed for a wedding.
Well, spending thousands on a wedding, again, is a cultural construct. My parents got married.
Think it's a very odd concept that you're forced to stay together.
Well, you're not nobody is forcing you. You make a promise that this is what you're going to do.
We have to leave it there, unfortunately, but thank you.
Carry on.
It's fine.
Thank you both very much. Right, still